This is probably going to be quite a short stream. I'm basically going to go through a map making competition that I've set up for the community, which will hopefully result in us getting some nice new maps for tournaments and stuff like that. So yeah, all the details and stuff, I'll be sure to post the links in AOD's Discord. I'll put it in my Discord. I'll put it up on Reddit and a few other places. But if you're curious, you can check out the link there, tibdon.com. It should take you straight to it. I'm going to quickly just run through it, all the stuff that's on there, go through some of the details. I'm also going to show Rambustring's modded version of the TD map editor, which a few people might not have seen before. It's actually quite nice and makes some fantastic quality of life improvements, so when you are actually making maps and stuff like that, it's a little bit easier. Definitely something I recommend doing. But for now, let's go over to this. Sweet. Awesome. So, hey Bron, it's good to see you. So the plan here is that this is going to run for the whole month of July. First place prize is due to get $20, second place $10. It'll likely be that I'll just convert those straight to euros, so €20, €10. Judges, I've gotten in touch with quite a few people actually in the community. So we've got Achromic White, Love Handles, McLama, Ferret, and myself who will actually be judging these maps. The majority of the current quick match maps on the remaster actually come from these players, and the others tend to have quite a few in terms of the custom maps. Like I know McLama's got the nuclear map set up. I think Ferret was the one who ported heavy metal, and I know Achromic's involved with. Achromic and Ferret are both kind of quite heavily involved with, I believe, Quarry and Elevation and a few others. So they have some good insight in terms of map design. And there's a bunch of useful links and stuff I'll be sure to mention here too. So if you need suggestions and resources and stuff like that, you can get it. So that's the 5 of us will be judging it. The deadline in terms of submissions for this will be the 30th of July, so you'll have the whole month to do it. And then after the 30th of July, there'll be up to 2 weeks time for the judges to decide the results and scoring, and basically just allowing that amount of time, because there are 5 of us, and depending on number of submissions, and just to make sure that things run smoothly, rather than try and have a turnaround in 1 or 2 days. It's likely it won't be the full 2 weeks, but we'll see how it goes. Which takes us on to map requirements. So the map should be designed with the following in mind. It will be used as a competitive map, so it should be 1v1. Only 2 spawns should feature on the map. Any tile set is fine, so whether that's there's 3, temperate, desert, and winter, I think. So you could use any of those 3, it's totally fine. And again, just be careful not to use any mods or like custom assets in it that won't be playable in a standard like custom match through the online system, because again, the intention of this stuff is for it to be used in the future for tournaments and stuff like that. The next thing, the design must be of your own making, so don't just copy and paste ports from Legacy C and CNET stuff. Love Handles is super familiar with a lot of those, as is Ferret, as is Chromic White, and I play quite a few of them too. So there is a very high likelihood that if you do decide to copy it and pass it off as your own work, that one of us is going to pick up on it. So yeah, just keep that in mind. And then that brings us on to the actual marking criteria. So what are we actually going to be looking at? There's a couple of different sections here. So the first up is that each of these criteria is going to be marked basically out of 5, and we're going to go through each judge. Each judge is going to rate it out of 5, complete a score sheet, and give some actual written feedback too, so you'll actually be able to have pretty useful practical feedback in terms of the way that your map currently looks, what areas need improvement, and then you can opt, if you wish, to make changes in future to improve on it, or just to get general feedback from a lot of these judges is quite valuable, I think, especially given how the majority of the maps that they've made have actually been used quite heavily in the latter. But the first marking criteria, Tiberian. So these are just rough guidelines on what each of these criteria will align to. So Tiberium, do both spawn points have equal access to starting tib fields and amounts? Does one spawn have a mining advantage over another? Ideally it shouldn't, right? Is there a reasonable amount of Tiberium available? Not too much, not too little. That can be kind of subjective as well, but the idea of having such a panel of judges is that this is kind of fair. And I know certain members of the panel prefer more tips, certain prefer less, and that'll be reflected in the scores, which will be averaged out. So yeah, that's Tiberium. The next criteria is use of terrain and objects. So considering creativity and use of physical elements such as walls, village structures, trees, rivers, cliffs, other terrain elements. Use of non-physical aesthetic elements, smudges and road markings, and then elements of realism and map layout. So does it look realistic? Are there like explosion smudges in a pre-damaged town? If there's a mirrored map, do they use different terrain and obstacles to be more realistic? Does it use the exact same obstacles? And again, some of this can be interpreted to be a little bit subjective, which is why these aren't strictly defined. But again, they're general criteria that the judges will be using and grading accordingly. And again, these will all be averaged, so it should be a fair result. The next criteria, map goals and points of interest. Is there a clear focal point for players to aim towards for map control? So when building maps, this is kind of an important aspect. What is the goal of the map, or what is the objective for the players to try and take control of? So as it says here, this might be something like a contested Tiberian field that may give whoever gets to it first an eco advantage, or it might be better positioning on some high ground in the center of the map. Or it might be, capturable neutral buildings in various different locations across the map. So these are all kind of things to think of regarding this point. The next section is in terms of base building and skill expression. So as the majority of you are already familiar, crawls are quite an iconic part of the TD ladder. So you need to kind of bear in consideration that does your map allow for players to crawl in multiple directions, take advantage of faction strengths and weaknesses, particularly like you want to try and avoid having just a big huge open map where GDI are just going to be at a huge disadvantage and just can't play it, right? You want to try and leverage the strengths and weaknesses of both elements when you're designing your map, and bear that in consideration. The next thing is the map specifically designed to enable quite a fast game? Is it going to enable a short game? These kind of things, and that can be dictated by stuff like map size. It can be dictated by the use of specific elements on the map. So for example, in Quarry, the cliffs make it seem a lot bigger than it actually is, whereas you have maps like slightly smaller maps that can force players to have conflict much earlier, which is totally fine if that's the clear intention of the map, right? So that's important to keep in mind for this as well, and is another criteria that will be marked. And of course, again, because this stuff can be somewhat subjective, it's going to be averaged across the judging panel. So those are kind of the key areas in terms of submission. All the steps are here. So first thing you do after you have your map made is upload it to the Steam Workshop. It's a fairly straightforward process. I'm going to fire up the map editor in a bit just to kind of go through some of these basic things, might be helpful. Verify that once you've uploaded your map to the Steam Workshop that it's accessible in game. So go to a custom lobby, search through the user maps, and you should be able to find it. It can take, from my experience, like 24 to 48 hours after uploading it to the workshop before it syncs up with EA servers, so just bear that in mind, i.e. don't leave it till the very last day. Once you have those two things, send a link to your uploaded map to myself. I don't particularly mind what channel you use to get it to me, but there are links here to my own public Discord, or you can send it via direct message, or if we're in a mutual Discord channel somewhere else, feel free to just ping it on to me. It's fine. And the other thing is, in addition to submitting your map, it's requested that you also forward across a replay file of a game that you've actually played on the map. And the reasoning for this is primarily to enable judges to have quick access to viewing how players might go about actually playing your map, right? During that 2-week judging window, I'll try and make some arrangements to play some of those maps with players that are active on the ladder. It could be a bit of fun, but it's important that we just have like at least one reference point to go from. And if you're unable to get this, just let me know, and we can see if we can make alternate arrangements. And as it says here, in the event of issues accessing maps in the game, so if you made your map and you published it to the Steam Workshop and it's not accessible through the in-game server system, because it can be a little bit sketchy at times, it may be viable for you to just send me the map files directly, but you'll need to get in touch with me directly for me to see if that's viable and to make sure that I can actually run the files locally and share it with the judges and all this kind of stuff. And again, sample submission stuff here. Yeah, and there's details there about getting a replay link, so if you've never got a replay before, how to go about doing it. Again, if there's any difficulties in actually trying to go through this process, by all means you can get in contact with me through whatever means is easiest for yourself. And then a few useful references in the bottom here. I suppose these are worth having a quick look at. So this one is from Craxus that was done quite a long time ago, giving some interesting ideas about, I think it was back in season 1 for the map pool, and some of the ratings and metrics and concepts around, you know, how to go about pursuing different avenues on your maps. So there's definitely some interesting concepts here to have a look at and see how it kind of ties into the existing maps and how you might adapt that to your own design. So be sure to check that out. Similarly, Kira has something in here in relation to key elements for map design, how it affects the gameplay, so stuff like map control, points of interest. And again, these aren't brand new articles, but they're definitely worth having a quick glance through to get some ideas and to go about just kind of trying to have a better understanding of these systems. And what kind of things you should be looking out for when designing a map for more competitive play. The next thing that I've linked in here is an old article from McCormick White, going through some of the key aspects of map design, and this is actually specific to TD/RA, and you'll find this article is quite useful if you're trying to come up with a set structure for your maps before you actually go into the editor. So what Chromic kind of outlines here is that there are various tiles with different positionings, kind of like Tetris, and then if you open up like a paint file and use it pixel by pixel, you're basically replicating the constraints of the actual map editor, and then you can color code it to get the right tiles in the right positioning before you go into the map editor. And then, you know, build half the map and realize that you're missing a specific tile or it doesn't exist. If you pre-design it this way, then, you know, you're going to have a much easier time in the long run. There's also stuff in here about paths and areas and considerations around that. There is a section here in relation to Tiberian bases. Some of it still holds up, some of it's a little less accurate in terms of some of the AI harf padding and stuff like that, but it's still worth definitely checking out. So there's a whole bunch of resources there that are worth having a look at. In addition to that, there's an FAQ section, so I've put in some basic stuff here. If you previously made and published a map, can you enter it? Yep, it's fine once it meets these criteria. You have a few maps you'd like to submit, how many can you enter? So I'm enabling a maximum here of 2 maps per person, just to make sure that it's a manageable amount for people to go through on the judging side of things. And then details here, as I mentioned before, if you've uploaded maps to Steam Workshop but they're not showing up in game, wait 48 hours. If it's still not visible, then you can drop me a message and we can try and make something work out. Hey Rash, yeah, no, that's totally fine. If that's what you want to go for. Sample score sheet. So again, this is just a rough version of it, so you have an idea of what to be looking out for. But essentially, each one of the judges will be completing this. I'll be averaging the scores out, and then compiling the list of map feedback so that you can have some good details to work from to improve your maps, should you wish to do so. So yeah, the whole idea behind this, of course, being to try and get more competitive maps in the community to help support future tournaments, so that the map pool doesn't get stale, so to speak. Is there a recommended map size? No, Rash, that's going to be up to yourself. The key thing is that it's going to only be for 2 players, so the kind of thing that you want to bear in consideration here is this criteria, base building / skill expression. If it's only a case that the map is like tiny, then you won't be able to do much. Making a huge array map you won't be able to do because it won't run in TD. The maximum map size that they have compatible through the editor, I think, is 62 by 62 or 64 by 64. So it has to run basically on the custom server section. You can't build a map that exceeds that requires an external mod. It's just one of the restrictions of it, but yeah. And then there's a section here, so anytime, yeah, well, Quarry is actually 62 by 61 for some reason. I'm not quite sure why, but you can be 62 by 62, which is like technically 64 I think in the editor, but you have to leave the tiles on the sides. I have a section here as well, so once I've actually received your submission and you're just waiting, you'll see all the details here. Ideally it'd be a snapshot of your map as well as a link, so there's a nice reference here for people to go back to and have a look through all the maps that have been submitted to date and see if they got any if the players have any interest in actually trying them out in the interim. So yeah, that's kind of all the details for it. As I say, it's all here. If you're interested, take a read through it. I'll share the link across Discord and I'll put it onto some of the Steam groups for CNCTD, and I'll stick it up on Reddit so people are aware of it. The next thing I will show you is that yeah, we'll go on to GitHub. We'll go onto Rampastring's GitHub page just really quickly to show you this. So there's a custom map editor that you can use, and I'll stick a link for this in the chat in a second once I find it. Here it is. So you can go here, and if you go into the README, there is a link that sends you into the releases, and you can actually download the edited, the modified version of the map editor here. So you just click this, and you'll download the zip file, which I've already done here. Then if you open the zip file, and you should buy your WinRAR license, but if you do that, you'll be able to extract all the contents out to a folder, which I have here. And then once you're in here, you'll see the one with the CNC icon, which will be the CNC TD or a map editor.exe, and you basically just run it from here. So if I double click this, the first time you run it, it asks you to put in the directory of your installation. So I'm going to have a quick glance to see where I actually have this installed. So it'll be in your Steam apps, common, CNC Remastered, yeah. So here's where I actually have it. It's on a different drive. What? So if I go to N drive, Steam apps, common, CNC Remastered. Oh, it's probably under bin, right? No. Maybe it means the actual client directory, I guess. Okay. So here we go. Here's the map editor. We go File, New. Select the game type. So Tiberian Dawn. You can pick any of these tiers. Doesn't matter. Each one has a different tile set, but that's up to yourself in terms of what you're going to do. Tempered is usually the most commonly used. So in terms of what this actual updated version of the map editor enables, first of all, this is a slightly better formatting. In the base editor, I believe only one of these will show up at a time and you have to go through the whole list. This makes it a little bit more manageable to scroll through and see what's actually available. In terms of the map options, smudges, This is again slightly different to the default editor, so you'll actually have a preview to the right and you'll be able to quickly scroll through all these on the left with the little previews. So again, it's a little bit easier. And then if you don't let it crash, then that's cool. If I go into terrain, you'll be able to see something similar here for all the trees. You'll have the drop down menu options. Infantry, similar again, a little bit easier to navigate. You can go through all of these options. Units, again, very similar. You can go through and see previews of all this stuff. It's just a little bit quality of life things to be able to quickly scan through this stuff compared to the base editor, but either or is fine. At the end of the day, it'll be the same map files, so it's totally fine. Yeah, so you'll be able to get through all this stuff, resources, walls, etc, etc. So this is all here. The only kind of key things that I would point out is when you are designing a map to be careful if you're placing stuff when you're placing houses and stuff like this, because if you see here, every structure you place is assigned to a house. So a house is like GDI, nod, multiplayer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You need to be careful that if you're placing structures that you define them as neutral before you put them down. Otherwise you'll accidentally give a player a potential vision of a different side of the map, because the structure technically belongs to their spawned faction or their multiplayer assigned slot. To place stuff into the map, yeah, as AOD says, you just press shift and click. To remove it, shift, right click. Fairly straightforward. There's a map settings section. In here you can determine things like build level. I'm not so sure this applies for the actual multiplayer. By default, because you're going to be playing it through a certain game type, like destroy all structures, destroy all units, that tends to overwrite a lot of these basic settings, I believe. So the only kind of key things here is you want to make sure single player is not ticked, because these are going to be multiplayer maps. Yeah, sticking the name here, that's kind of the key thing, whatever you want to call the map. There's no requirements for the contest to name anything specific, so name it whatever once it's not offensive. Obviously, just use your common sense. Team types and triggers you shouldn't need to worry about in terms of multiplayer maps, so that's fine. If you are interested in that stuff for making single player maps, there's a bunch of useful resources in the Steam Workshop for it. It's pretty good. Or you can ping me and I can send you on some stuff. There is some quite interesting stuff that you can do, but it can be kind of unintuitive at first, so I would stick with just the basic things. The other thing, as I kind of mentioned roughly before, this is crashing out because I have a second version of this installed, but the other thing to be aware of is that don't assume that every tile that you plan to use exists. So for example, let's say in your head you're thinking of building a specific cliff face, I guess, and you want to put down a few of these, and then you want to have, say, what's a good example? You want to have like a cliff with a waterfall in the center of it, right? Now if you just assume that tile exists and you come in here, then you're going to have a bit of trouble, right? But if you premeditate and consider ahead of time, well, what tiles are actually here, what makes sense, and that ties a lot into Chromic White's map design idea of open and paint, and specifying a specific map size. So if I go into paint, you can adjust the canvas to whatever, you go file new and adapt it, get your like 62 by 62 grid file or whatever it is you want. You can come in and then you can actually start drafting it out tile by tile. That's one way to go about doing it. The other way is to just do it freehand and say YOLO. Stuff to consider though when you are doing that is it's very much going to be left versus right. Is the ideal arrangement, I would say, because of the balance of the game. Players who start on the bottom have a couple of advantages over those who start at the top. The first of which is not this song. The first of which is going to be the refinery placement. So if you have a spawn on the top and a spawn on the bottom, the refs on the top are going to take longer to come out. Harves will pop out, go to the side and go up, whereas if you're spawning directly on the bottom of the map and you've tip below you, the harvesters just go straight down. It's a shorter travel distance. The other side is that there's a +1 turret advantage, so anybody who is on the south part of the map will be able to have an extra +1 range on the opponent's structures, and this tends to be more an issue with nod mirror matchups, but it's something to take into consideration. Another option that you do have available is you could try do opposite corners, but again, just bear in mind the limitations and advantages that might give you, depending on which spawn that you actually end up using. Anything else? AOD saying you had trouble doing shorelines. Yeah, the shorelines are limited on corners. They're also limited in terms of left versus right. So like you can have a shoreline on like the bottom of the map, let's say, or on the top, but if you want to actually like have a full island, I believe trying to get like nicely matched up corner pieces can be tricky. The other thing I guess that's worth pointing out is that on each of these individual tiles, when you click it, in the little preview window here, if you only want one section of this, you can actually click it, and that'll actually let you just place that one section of that overall tile, like so, right? So you can actually use that, and it tends to be a case like if you have a weird mismatch, like your cliff is off by 1 or off by 2, this is a useful thing, because you can go to your cliffs. What's a good example? Let's just go with these, for example. And let's say like you just want to have one section here, you can then just take it like so, right? Or if it doesn't look quite right, you can mix and match, etc. It is likely that if you were doing this stuff freehand, you're probably going to have not 100% consistency. Like it's likely that you'll need to hide like a kind of a scan line or something like this. In terms of the level of detail we're going to be looking at, like I don't think anyone's going to be docking you like a shit ton of marks if we happen to notice that like a single tile or something looks a bit off, right? If it's glaringly obvious, then maybe, but you can usually hide this kind of stuff with trees, for example, are a pretty good way of doing it. You could just stick it down, nobody's the wiser, right? It's pretty useful. Useful thing is when you're positioning blossom trees, if you're like debugging your map and testing it as you go along, when you actually place a blossom tree, it doesn't necessarily start out that way as a tree, so to speak, or as a blossom tree. It might spawn when you first load the map as a regular tree, but it'll automatically shift into a blossom tree over time. Just wait. If you want to place a civilian structure at half health, for example, click on the structure you want. Again, if it's going to be a neutral structure, set it to neutral. And this strength value is what determines the health. So if you want a structure at half health, divide this number by 2, which is 128, which I accidentally have set to my hotkeys because I'm using the numpad. But yeah, if you place that at half health, it'll go down there. Again, it's going to switch that because I'm using the numpad. But again, 50%, this is going to be even less, so quarter health, and you can see the damage reflected in the model. So yeah, that's how you go about putting down half health stuff. You might consider using stuff like a hospital and a prison as kind of neutral structures that either player can capture. Some players have used maps. I'm thinking of George. Has made quite a lot of 2D maps, and I think a few of them tend to have neutral or special defined things like Visceroids and Dinosaurs, which end up like a kind of like a buffer between two players, which is totally fine if you want to try to do that. The only thing I would say is that you want to be careful in terms of how that balance works out. For example, if it's left versus right and you have them going straight down the middle, then the player who attacks first has to kind of deal with that, which is, you know, up to you in terms of what way you want to go about doing the map. Be cautious in terms of who is attacking who, and if you're using neutral defense structures, so if you use a neutral guard tower or advanced guard tower or obelisk, I believe it will not necessarily attack units unless you attack first. So there are kind of little intricacies like that that you can kind of play around with. Yeah, that's pretty much most things, I think. I don't know if there's anything else really in terms of the editor that you need to worry about. Waypoints, you basically want a player 0 and a player 1. This will correspond to the two multiplayer players, so that's all you need. So set 1 and wherever you want the first player to spawn, and the other one where the second player spawns. You don't need to put in units, like the MCV will auto spawn on this waypoint marker, so that's where you start by default in the multiplayer games. Yeah, like I say, if you want to try and give a player vision on the other side of the map, you could potentially set down a neutral structure there, aligned with their house, but it can be a little bit finicky if you start going down that route. But by all means, you can experiment with it, see how it works out for you. If you try and assign things like infantry to a specific player, so let's say you want a situation where you spawn here, and say it's like a standard mission, but you want to make sure that the player starts out with a couple of artillery or something like that. This tends to not work for a few reasons. One of them is, again, defined based on when the map starts. If it's destroy all structures or all units, it gets rid of these custom units, I believe, and then you're just stuck with the Conyard. The other issue is in terms of the house that you assign these units to. So you'll see in here, multi 1 to multi 6 corresponds roughly to positions in the map list. So you'll have like multi 1 is player 1, multi 2 is player 2. But I found quite inconsistent behavior with this stuff when I last went into the editor and played around with this stuff, but that was, 2 patches ago. So just be cautious that if you're using this stuff to define special units for special houses, that's in like the map description or something, so that players, when they actually go into it, they're aware of it in advance. They're not just accidentally like spawning on the left hand side of the map surrounded by the opponent's artillery and then just instantly die, right? So this is again why it's a good idea to test player maps at least once or twice with someone else, even when you've published it, just to make sure everything looks good. Gunboats, you can set. I've never tried to use these in a multiplayer map setting in terms of it attacking both players, but I'm sure you can configure it that way. If you need to, under map settings, you can go into multi 1 or multi 2 depending, and you can set the ally section here. So if you want a specific gunboat to only be allied with player 1, let's say multi 1 is player 1, you could then have them aligned with special, hit OK, and then have special aligned with multi 1, hit OK, and those two houses are going to be working together. It's a good way of doing it. You can potentially try and abuse the fact that you're going to have 2 spawn points, so these 4 extra houses might be available for allying up with your units, but again, the behavior in game is something that you're going to have to test out and experiment with and see how that all goes. What else? A common thing that tends to come up is, how do I resize the map boundary? So if you don't necessarily want it to be whatever it is, 62 by 62, I believe you can define this at the start. It's been a while since I've had to look at this. Yeah, if you hold control, you can then resize this. And it'll have to be based on one of the corners, just the nature of the map. And then this will be the area that the actual players have to use. Again, there's no hard requirements in terms of map size for the sake of the contest, but again, just bear in mind the key criteria that are there in terms of, player expression of skill. Like if they can only build a power plant and racks into each other, like, could be fun. but it's going to be difficult to mark highly in some of that stuff, right? Especially if there's like no tib on the map, right? Could be fun though. I'd be happy to see some maps like that if people want to submit them. What else? Walls are a good structure that you can use because they tend to be neutral. You don't actually assign them to a specific faction, so you can just plop them wherever. Shouldn't cause you any issues, and it's a nice little feature. Yeah, for sure, Eddie. You can submit 2 maps. That's fine. You can submit the source of one for sure, and that gives you freedom to do another one as well. The same with I'm sure Meds might watch this later, but he can submit the split ends, I guess, and then if he wants to do another one, he can submit that as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of the editor. I don't think that there's really much else to do. When you are finished with your map, you can hit publish here. It'll require you to have stuff saved first, but you can go in there, hit publish, and it'll give you the option to just submit it. Yeah, cell triggers you won't need to worry about for multiplayer. This is just like if you stand on a tile, then it triggers reinforcements to come in or something. The other option is that if you if you are looking to do stuff like that, you need to make sure you wall off the sides, because when you're setting up reinforcements, you only specify direction, so they come from either the north, south, east, or west. And the problematic thing with this is that it can come in anywhere from the north, anywhere from the south, anywhere from the east, or anywhere from the west. So if you played the single player, you might have noticed on some maps that there are complications where units might not spawn in correctly because they're doing this weird hack where you have to go to the effort of like blocking off all of the edges except for the one little choke that you want the units to appear in, and then they come in through this direction. It's pretty crazy, but yeah, you can open up maps that you've already downloaded, so custom maps. You can go into file, open, and go to the right directory and check it out. Noble sub, good to see you, dude. Map making contest, yeah. So the idea of it is that you've got the whole month of July to go through this. I can switch over to here since we're not using that. You got the whole month of July to submit it. 30th of July is the deadline. So long as it's a 2-player map, it'll run on CNC Tiberian Dawn. We're not doing Red Alert maps this time, at least. There will be the 4 key criteria. There's 5 judges. It'll be an average scoring across the board. In the event that there's something like a tie situation, then we'll deliberate amongst ourselves and come to the conclusion, and there'll be full transparency in terms of that. This will just be multiplayer stuff. The details are available at that link if you want to check them out. But for this, it's only going to be multiplayer, at least for now. Might do a single player one in the future, but there's already quite a healthy community building a lot of those maps. What this is trying to encourage is to have some of the active online players go about designing new maps that we can use for some competitive play in tournaments in future. So not single player at the moment. But yeah, that's kind of the basics. As I say, you can send the map files to me directly. It doesn't matter what medium you use. There's links on that site to my own Discord stuff, so you can send it to me directly, or if you want to ping me somewhere else, that's totally fine. I'll be sure to throw that link around the place shortly, but that's pretty much it. I don't know if there's any questions that the people who are here have. I'll probably stick a VOD of this up on YouTube or somewhere just to have a quick, easy link to it to spread around. But I think that's covered everything. Nice, nice. Yeah, you should totally feel free to do it. The map editor tooling is actually it takes a little bit to get used to, but like you tend to, once you've used one map editor, you've used quite a lot of them. Especially for these kind of older games, even if they are remastered, it's kind of relatively intuitive, like especially when it's multiplayer only, so you don't really have to worry about stealth triggers and events and stuff like this. It's more the just balance and trying to think about how this stuff will play out. But yeah, hopefully it's a bit of fun. That's the idea. Mapping out the design in Paint? Yeah, exactly. There's links at the bottom of that tipdon.com link that give you an idea for how to go about doing that. So you open up Paint, get your 62 by 62 grid, and then use each pixel to represent a tile, and use your Tetris skills to plan out each tile placement ahead of time and then go into the map. Other approaches people take is they just kind of wing it as they go along, which is also fine. There's no wrong way to do it. But there is certainly less frustrating ways to do it, because you don't necessarily want to be in a situation 30 minutes into designing something and then you can't pull it off because you're missing tiles that don't exist. It can happen. It's happened to me. It's happened to plenty of people. But yeah, a lot of options, so it should be good. Yeah, in terms of streams and stuff related to it, as I say, the deadline date for submission of this stuff and for it to be accessible is the 30th of this month. So it's a case that the 2 weeks after that we'll be deliberating. I'll see if I can ping a few members of the community and we'll play some custom matches on them. It should be a bit of fun, but we'll see. Regarding mining advantage, it matters if the Tiberian is on the left or right side of the refinery. So it's preferred, I would say, Noble, that left v right is better than top v bottom for sure. The travel distance between like a harvester going to a field on the left versus a harvester going to a field on the right is quite minimal, so I wouldn't get too bogged down on that one extra tile, let's say. But it is a bigger deal if it's like a harvester coming out and going all the way up to get Tib versus a harvester just going straight down. And similar enough with the defense structures. If you're on the bottom of the map, your turrets and stuff have +1 range shooting up. So it's another thing to bear in mind for balance. There is also the list of maps on the Tibdon link that you can have a look at in terms of some that were considered by the community to be potential quick match games. So a lot of good ideas available. Yeah, you make multiple entries. 2 is the maximum per person. That's no problem. And again, the reasoning for that is just because we need to... I honestly have no idea how many people plan to enter, but we need to be careful in terms of just correlating all the judging and stuff, because there is 5 of us. So it will take a little bit of time just to go through that process. But yeah, should be good. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Not Tibdon. Once again, the link is there. I don't know if the ladder is actually active at the moment. I can try hop on it for a bit. Yeah, it's multiplayer 1v1.